Greetings, everyone. This is Eric Glazer, and welcome to Bright Spots in Healthcare, produced by Shared Purpose Connect. We bring leaders together to not only inform you, but also unearth bright spots, successes at health plans, hospitals, and other organizations around the globe. Our goal is to identify as many bright spots as possible so that you can determine if the ideas shared during this episode can be applied at your organization. We believe that this approach of finding a bright spot and cloning it is the most effective strategy to improve healthcare in our lifetime. If you have not subscribed to Bright Spots in Healthcare, I encourage you to do so right now, wherever you are listening or watching. Grab your podcast app, type in Bright Spots in Healthcare, click subscribe. You get access to all of these leaders within the industry who share incredible successful strategies and tactics that are going on at their health plans, their hospital systems, their technology companies that you could potentially apply at your organization. I highly encourage you to do it, not to hear me talk, but to hear of all of our guests talk. And speaking of which, we have a very special episode today that we are recording. Every so often, I dare to go outside of our industry and bring in experts so that we could get away from our echo chamber and hear lessons learned from other places. And today I've gone to the NFL and brought in Mike Lombardi, who's a former general manager and executive, and spent most of his life in and around the NFL, where there are so many incredible leaders that lead organizations at an executive level and or down at the coaching level. And we wanted to see if we could learn from them on leadership lessons from the NFL and how we could apply that to our businesses here in healthcare. So, Mike, welcome to Bright Spots in Healthcare. It's a little bit of a new niche for you, huh?
No, thank you. I mean, look, everybody thinks the NFL is a separate entity, but it's really not. I think healthcare, football, business, it all runs together. It all is what wins in football wins in healthcare. What loses in football usually loses in healthcare. So, yeah, for me, I think it's all the same. And I appreciate you having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. Why don't we start, for those of you who may not know you, tell us a little bit about yourself, and then I've got some planned questions that I can't wait to get into.
Well, I mean, I was very fortunate at a very young age. I kind of knew what I wanted to do in life. I saw a guy on television that looked like he belonged at all my family dinners. He had olive skin, big nose on Sundays, and he was Italian, and he had the same last name as me. So I kind of idolized this coach, and I wanted to be in football. And eventually, I did. I followed his path, went to college, got into college football, and then worked my way into scouting. I didn't go the coaching route. I went the football route, the personnel route. So by doing that, I worked my way up there, and I was fortunate enough to work for somebody who was an outside the box thinker, and Coach Walsh, who I would drive around in his Porsche, and he would ask me questions about certain things. And one day he asked me a question if I knew who Tom Peters was. And I said, I thought to myself for a moment, should I lie and tell him it's the punter from North Dakota, or should I just tell him the truth? And I listened to my mother, and I told him the truth. I said, I didn't know. He said, well, he just wrote a book called In Search of Excellence with Bob Woodiford. You need to go buy the book and read it, because I don't want you to be, no disrespect, I don't want you to be a gym teacher. I want you to be an executive. And so I read that book and got hooked on a leadership journey that has benefited me after my NFL career. It benefited me during my career, but it's given me kind of a life in my NFL career.
That's great. A couple things for our audience. If you hear a book mentioned, a link mentioned, we'll get that all into the show description. If you're listening to the podcast, just scroll down. You'll have those there. If you're watching live, we'll also get those to you in a follow-up email. And by the way, if you're watching live and you want to ask Mike questions, let us know. Producer Sherry Keels and I will monitor that, and you can help me co-moderate here. Mike, I know you're not used to doing this, but I want to be cognizant that we have a little bit of a different audience. And for those of you who don't know, I'm a huge sports fan, so I know all these names that Mike's going to talk about. But Bill Walsh, Coach Walsh, just a quick description of who he is, and then I have a follow-up question about him specifically.
Well, Coach Walsh was a football coach who started in as you would not know him to be a football coach. He wasn't the burly brute force guy. He was a very intellectual person who read a lot of different things, thought differently, very divergent in thought. And he went on to become the head of the San Francisco 49ers, which he brought them from where they were not very good to becoming one of the best, having a dynasty in pro football. And he also was the inventor or the entrepreneur of the West Coast offense, which is his version of solving a problem divergently. When he first started with this expansion team, the Cincinnati Bengals, they were not very good. So instead of complaining about not being very good, Coach Walsh decided to find alternative ways to be good. And I think ultimately that's what he did. And he was able to make a name of himself. And a lot of coaches in the NFL, the National Football League today, come from his tree, come from his influence on the game today.
So let's talk a little bit more about that and talk about leadership lessons that you've learned. And you got to work with Coach Bill Walsh. You've worked closely with Coach Bill Belichick, Al Davis. What are some of the core leadership principles that you can speak to that can maybe translate to an executive that's towards the C-suite at a health plan or a hospital system, or even just managing their own small team?
I think the number one lesson that all of them had that you have to be a successful leader is you have to keep the main thing the main thing. And I think that's the hardest thing we all do, because we get into these jobs where we're getting hit from all different directions. And at the end of the day, you've got to decide what is truly the job. What is this job that they've asked me to perform? What's the main thing in this job? What am I leading the people that work for me to get to? And simplify it. Einstein has 5 levels of intelligence, and his number one level of intelligence is simple. Who can make the complex simple? So whatever field you're in, whatever discipline you desire in terms of your field of expertise, you've got to simplify it. And those you lead have to understand where they're going. It's the number one thing people want. We complain about this generation. Oh, we have too many people. It's hard to lead. Well, a lot of the problems isn't the generational people we're leading. It's us. We keep changing what the main thing is. So all 3 of those people, Walsh, Belichick, who people may not know, he's the former head coach of the Patriots, one of the winningest coaches of all time. Al Davis was a former owner and coach of the Oakland Raiders, now the Las Vegas Raiders. But the main thing was always what they were doing. We are in this business, and I've learned through time that we can get distracted. One of my heroes in life is a man by the name of Robert Caro. He's written 5 books. He's written 5 books in his entire life. He's 87 years old. And 4 of those books are on Lyndon Johnson. And one book, the first book he wrote, was on Robert Moses, called The Power Broker. And every morning when he goes into his office in Midtown Manhattan, he reads a paragraph before he starts work about what the book is about that he's writing, that he's working on. And that sets the course for where he wants to go. And I think that's the number one lesson you have to have. It's called management of attention. Do we know where we're going? And that's the core principle of leadership. And if you can't do that, then it's a real issue.
Could you give an example of one of those football, Bill or Al, where they were keep the main thing into practice, just so people could kind of picture? I like the Robert Caro example. That's a really good one too, but like maybe something around keep the main thing so that leaders who are managing people right now could get a sense of maybe how to apply that at their place.
For the main thing, okay, so let's talk about hiring practices. How the main thing there, we want to hire talent. People say that, right? But if the main thing is to hire the right people for the right organization, so you have to define what you're looking for. You have to define the kind of people that fit within the framework of what you do. And so when someone comes to you and says, we should hire this person, but the person doesn't fit the criteria that we've set to hire, we're not keeping the main thing the main thing. And so when we lose sight of who we are, go to Chick-fil-A. Why are they so good? Because they only do what they do. They don't try to do something outside the boundaries of what they are. They don't pretend they're something different. And I think that's the issue. In-N-Out Burger, if you ever go west of the Mississippi, they're a great company. Because they know who they are and they know what they do. And great leaders operate that way, whether it's in healthcare. What are we in healthcare? Are we about the patient? Are we about the doctor? Who are we? And I think that's really what you have to ask yourself every single day.
It's a good transition because I want to talk about team building. Quick PSA, folks. This episode will be immediately available on our YouTube channel, and then it goes into our podcast feed tomorrow. So those of you who want to share it with folks, aren't able to attend the whole thing, you can get the whole recording through the podcast feed and our YouTube channel. And like I said, anywhere you listen to podcasts, just type in Bright Spots in Healthcare. So you mentioned team building. You said to find the person that we're looking for. I know we've had some conversations about this before. Like, as an NFL is building a successful team, how, and thinking as healthcare leaders, how can we create high performance teams in our organization, and sort of what are some of the recruitment strategies they could learn from the NFL?
Well, I think the number one thing is you have to define. Belichick has there's four things that were on the wall when you walked into the Patriots office, Eric, that were defining the Patriots. And the one thing said, do your job, speak for yourself, put the team first, and do your job, speak for yourself, and be attentive. So those four things, right? Well, do your job became very popular. I don't think if anybody's in the sports world, Belichick's famous for just do your job. Well, that's great. It's wonderful. But what is your job? And so when you're hiring, you've got to define what the job is. And then when you're hiring, you also have to decide what qualifications meet what fits the job. It's what Bill Walsh would say, we're scouting inside out, not outside in. So, for example, if I'm looking for a right guard on the football team, and that's the offensive lineman who plays next to the center, here's the qualifications or the characteristics that I want from that player, and I line them up. So then I search for the people that fit the criteria. I just don't randomly search. The FBI doesn't open up a phone book and look for serial killers. They have a criteria that they look for. And so when hiring, you have to be able to say, here's what I want. So we were in Cleveland together, Belichick and I, and then in New England. We were hiring young people to work. We knew that the program that we had built was built on discipline, hard work, self-assessment, the ability to be aware, self-awareness. So we wanted to find people that had come from a military school background or a Jesuit school background, because we wanted someone who's trained in writing. Jesuits love to teach you how to write. Somebody from a military background, somebody who's disciplined. Now, that didn't exclude everybody, but those were what we were looking for. Do you have those traits? And so then when we interview the people, we were able to then have a conversation about that. And then we could highlight that. Do you fit here? See, what most people, they're constantly searching for the perfect player. Walsh used to say this all the time. The search for the perfect player never ends. We have to find somebody who's self-aware that we can mold into the perfect player.
That's interesting. So find someone who has the ingredients, then self-aware enough to become molded into that perfect team member at your organization. I like that. I like that a lot. Let me quickly pause, folks, and let you know about something that's interesting. I could have you guys ponder for a bit. Mike has helped launch a program called the Daily Coach Network. He has a newsletter that I started consuming that's fantastic. It's free. Google it, Daily Coach. And he sends out a weekly newsletter, which is just really good. And he started a highly vetted membership community of coaches, executives, business leaders who inspire, teach, and support each other to build, championship teams and cultures. It could be in sports, it could be in healthcare, it could be somewhere else. And the community, of which I am a member, for the record, meets on Zoom every month, multiple times a month, not all obligatory. It's sort of as your schedule allows, to discuss new ideas, leadership challenges, support each other in sort of the quest to improve the performance of our teams and to improve who we are as leaders. And you could be, a CEO of a big organization or a director or vice president within your organization. We're all leaders to an extent, and we want to be able to build that skill set. So I wanted to let you guys know about it. It's a mix. It's got some sports folks. It's got business folks. It's a 50-50 mix, which is cool. Yesterday, I was on a call where we actually rotate and have one-on-one conversations with our peers within the network. And I went from talking to a D1 varsity coach to an FBI agent to a former CEO of a hospital to a former healthcare executive who was special advisor to the secretary of HHS and beyond. So there's a really cool group of folks that you get to meet and learn from and share ideas with. So if that is something that you are interested in becoming part of, it's an application process. But if you want to join the Daily Coach, they're accepting 15 new members in August. So you can submit an application before July 29th by going to, and we'll put this in the show description, and we'll also put it in the chat here on Zoom, apply.thedailycoachnetwork.com, apply.thedailycoachnetwork.com, and you can come in there. And by the way, type in, if you write in bright spots, so one of the guys that runs this thing day to day told me if you type in bright spots, in the referral section, you'll get an extra month on your first membership if you end up joining. So highly recommend it. You get to meet a lot of interesting people and learn a lot of different things from different folks outside of healthcare, which is super awesome, and healthcare. Okay, I want to talk about high pressure situations because in healthcare, not just doctors are under high pressure, but management is all the time, whether you're at a health plan, provider system, even a solution-oriented technology company. And the NFL is also high pressure, as you know, Mike. So how do leaders like a Bill Belichick manage stress and maintain focus during these critical moments? And how could we here in healthcare apply these tactics in our high-stake kind of settings?
I think, one of the ways to handle stress and levels of pressure that you feel from the outside is, I listened to this man, and I've quoted another writer here, Shelby Foote, who wrote the 3-volume set of the Civil War. It's
Shelby Foote with like Foote.
Foote, yeah. He's famous for writing if you ever watch the Ken Burns documentary on the Civil War, he's in there, he's in a beard. He's a Southern gentleman from Greenville, Mississippi, and he explains everything, every battle in the Civil War. It took him 1.5 million words to write it. He would write 500 words a day. It took him 20 years to complete the whole thing. But they asked him one time, they said, when you're on the show and you're talking about this, how do you handle all this pressure? And he says, because I know my subject very well. And I think pressure is only about you feel it if you feel you've missed something. I'll give you a perfect example. In Super Bowl 49, playing in Glendale, Arizona, we had just taken a 28 to 24 lead, and the Seattle Seahawks got the ball with just a little bit more than 2 minutes left to go in the game, and they start driving it immediately right down the field like nothing. And they have the ball, 2nd and goal from the 4-yard line, and the clock is ticking down. And everybody in the booth, me included, are screaming at the top of our lungs for Bill Belichick to call timeout. And Belichick is just calmly looking over at the Seattle sideline. Now, the clock's ticking from 25 to 24 to 23. He's not doing anything but focusing and concentrating on it. He knows his subject. And he doesn't call a timeout. He calls a defense that we've never run before the entire year. Never. We installed it back in March, in theory. We practiced it in June, July, August, and all the way through the season. But the first time he calls it, he yells out, just play goal line nickel. And we run Malcolm Butler, a college free agent who had never played, it was a rookie, never played in a big game before, played at West Alabama College, and take off our best player, Devin McCourty, to play a defense that we've never played before. It doesn't make a lot of sense, but we do it. but we practiced, but it was for this specific situation. But he calmly called it out. And I think because he was calm, he could handle the magnitude of the pressure. And that only comes through preparation. That only comes through preparation. And so when you know your subject well, you handle this, you don't even feel the pressure. It's when you feel like you've cut a corner or you feel like you're getting something that you don't expect. And that happens a lot, but you rely on your experience and your feel. And Belichick just calmly said, play goal line nickel. And Malcolm Butler intercepted the pass and we won Super Bowl 49.
So in a situation maybe where you think you're well prepared, and that's a great story, and I experienced that live when I watched that game on television. When you're, let's say, in a situation where you're in an acquisition situation, you're in a high pressure meeting to make a decision, maybe you're in front of your board and you think you're prepared, but something comes up that maybe just was a curveball for you. Is the first instinct or the thing that you need to train your leaders on is just remaining calm and then doing what with that? Because in this case, it sounded like there were some instincts there, and he obviously understood right away. Bill did, Coach Belichick, that what defense he was going to call. But what if he didn't know? What if he didn't have that defense? He's still looking at the sidelines. He sees what's going on the other side of the field. There's a little bit of chaos. So if you're in the boardroom, you're pitching an acquisition target to your board of directors, and you get thrown a curveball by one of the board members. Like, what are some things that you need to be training your leadership on understanding in those high pressure situations?
Well, I think a lot of that, Belichick was observing the Seattle sideline, and he saw they looked confused and disoriented, and he didn't want to give them the benefit of a doubt by calling timeout. So I think you have to observe. There's a great quote by Marcus Aurelius: the secret to all victory lies in the organization of the non-obvious. And so if you're in one of those high pressure and you get thrown a curveball, which is not obvious to you, is sometimes you're better off just taking a step back and saying, well, we need to think about that for a while and read the room. Like, there's never going to be a decision that you have to make initially that you haven't been prepared for. And if you need time to prepare it, well, we're not prepared to make that decision at this point. We need to look at it from a different angle. It's what we call second level thinking, second order thinking. When you look at a solution, what is the alternative to the solution? And I think when you're trying to get pressured into making a decision in a high power situation, it's probably not going to be beneficial to you. And they want to see if you have enough poise, if you have enough presence to be able to take a step back and say, we need to analyze that more. It's like when you don't ask a question, but you want to ask the question because you're too scared to ask it. That's on you. When we ask questions, we learn. And if you're going to get pressured into making a decision just because of the moment, you're probably going to make a bad decision.
What was that quote? I really liked it and I missed it. Understand the secret to
all victory lies in the organization of the non-obvious.
I love that.
So when you see the non-obvious, you have to see the non-obvious. It's like Al Davis used to say this all the time. He was the former owner of the Raiders. Our job is to anticipate the problems, not react. Right? Like, for example, I don't know, this happens in sports quite a bit. The Texas A&M baseball coach who just competed for the World Series against Tennessee just left to go to the University of Texas. Well, if you were the athletic director at Texas A&M and you knew that your team was in the College World Series and you knew your coach was hired by the AD at Texas at another, when they were both at TCU together, you have to anticipate that you could lose that coach. We get paid to anticipate problems. We don't get paid to react to them. That's what leaders do. And so you have to sit there and see what's the non-obvious. It's deductive reasoning. It's what makes Sherlock Holmes so great. I think I've showed you this video before, but I am a Kennedy assassination buff. I'm going to solve this before it's all said and done. Not that I have enough of an ego to think I can, but what you want to do when you're an assassination buff is to create as much awareness as you can that we don't have the right solution. And if you look at the Zapruder tape, which is horrendous to look at, what people don't notice in that tape, I don't know if you were on the call when I showed it to everybody, but there are 3 yellow lines painted about 15 feet apart from one another. They look like no parking lines. Okay? They look like there are no parking lines whatsoever. And yet there they are. And the reason they're there is because to tell the shooters that's the kill zone. Or else why they were painted the night before. They were freshly painted. And so they're counting on none of us seeing that, because so often we don't see the obvious. We don't see the non-obvious. So they could actually did that. And here we are 60 years later, and no one's mentioned that the sidewalk is painted in Dealey Plaza yellow with 4 different sections, all about 4 feet, not parking. Well, it's the Stemmons Freeway. No one parks on the Stemmons Freeway. But that's an example of the non-obvious.
I want to summarize some stuff that I just heard. I've been just taking copious notes around calmness and preparation in high pressure situations. I'm paraphrasing, of course, but one of the keys to success is often the non-obvious. So to look for the non-obvious, always be looking for an alternative to the solution. And as good leaders get paid, or any leader gets paid to anticipate problems, not necessarily react to problems. Let's talk about change, because high pressure situations are often driven by change, and being able to reacting to change is usually sometimes necessary, but being able to anticipate change and adapt to it is obviously the most effective way of running a business, if you can. So, talk to me about examples of how NFL leaders who you worked with have navigated change and how these strategies can benefit all of us in the healthcare industry.
I think we often confuse the word change with being different, right? The change is evolutionary. You have to be adaptive to the what's going on, but you don't change your core principles. For example, hard work's never going to change. Being competitive won't change, right? Being able to teach won't change. How we teach will change. What we teach might change, but the idea of what it takes to win will never change. So once we understand what is really changing and what needs to stay the same, we can deal with it. When I worked at the Raiders, I worked for a gentleman by Al Davis, as I mentioned before. He wore the same thing every day, either wore a white outfit or a black outfit. He ate the same meal every day for lunch, a tuna fish sandwich. He ate the same thing for dinner. He hated change. So in my office, when he would come in, I had a sign behind me that said, if you don't like change, you're going to like irrelevance even less. And we eventually became irrelevant because we wouldn't be adaptive to the time. Our core principles stayed the same, but we didn't adapt we didn't adapt what we did to our principles. We still worked hard. We still were competitive, but we didn't adapt the other areas. So we were always behind. And I think that's what you have to do is what do we have to adapt to, and what do we have to work on? And the only way you're able to be adaptive is to constantly teach yourself. You have to be able to learn. Henry Kissinger said in his memoirs, in the beginning of his memoirs, he said, when you go to Washington, you borrow on the intellectual power you bring, and you can't renew it once you're there. Well, in today's world, this was back in the 70s, we can renew our intellectual capacity because we have different ways of doing it, whether we listen to a podcast, whether we watch this webinar online, or whether we listen to it on later, or we listen to Rick Rubin's podcast or someone. We have a way to increase it. And we've got to take what we learn from that and apply it moving forward. So that's how we deal with change. Curiosity allows us to change. But what we don't want to do is go from selling hamburgers one day to selling chicken sandwiches the next day.
Yeah, there's actually, I love what you said that, and that totally resonates. And I don't know if I've mentioned on the show before, Sherry will probably tell me, but there's a great book that I learned through a colleague at the Daily Coach Network on curiosity that I've recommended to so many people by Brian Grazer, who's a Emmy award-winning, Oscar award-winning producer. It's called A Curious Mind: The Secret to a Bigger Life. So there's a book recommendation I could throw in. It's so important to always be thinking, asking questions. Could you any thought about a successful adoption to change that you experienced? The Raiders example is probably something where certain things you just didn't adopt to, and all of a sudden you have irrelevance. Talk to me about one where you saw your organization adopt appropriately and obviously benefit because of it.
Well, I think, we live in a world of technology, right? And so you've got to take in technology and embrace it. Aristotle talks about analytics. He was really the father of analytics. But what I think you have to do is understand what you're measuring when it comes to analytics. What he would say to you is, if I drop this pencil on the ground, it's going to fall for gravity. So if I do this 50 years from now, it's still going to fall. So you could measure that. What you can't measure is things that change. If we're playing the Browns on Sunday and next week we play the Bears, that's a different team, a different opponent. So you've got to be willing to be adaptive to the next team you play. And I think in any business, your competitors force you to become more adaptive, to figure out how to change. And how do you do that? Well, you study your competitors. You study who you're trying to beat. That's the main goal here. You got to study who you need to beat. You can't just say, oh, well, we'll see how it goes. No, we got to figure out, what are they doing that we're not doing? There's a great scene in if you ever watched the TV show, it was called The Offer. There's a great scene in The Offer where the man Robert Evans was running Paramount Pictures. Paramount Pictures was one of the major studios in Hollywood at the time. They were ranked about 8th out of 10 studios. They'd just been bought by Golf Western, and Charlie Budhauser owned them. He owned Golf Western. And so he hired Robert Evans, who comes from a completely different background as the executive to run the company. He didn't have a film background. And so he decided he could no longer compete with the other major studios to get actors. So for him to get actors, it was too expensive to put in films, because back then, if you put John Wayne in a movie, the movie would automatically sell. So he decided to buy books. So he started buying books to turn into movies. And he bought Love Story. He bought the play The Odd Couple. He bought a bunch of things that really turned out to be good. One of the books he bought for $10,000 was The Godfather for Mario Puzo. And so one day he's sitting in his office and he's got Robert Evans there and he's got all his accountants around him. And he gets a phone call from Jack Warner of Warner Brothers Pictures. And Jack Warner offers him $1 million to buy the rights to The Godfather. Now, that would have been a $990,000 profit in 1970, which all the accountants in the room were screaming, buy it, sell it, sell it, sell it. But Budhauser had a great line. He hangs up the phone and he says, what do they know that I don't? And so to be adaptive to change and to be ahead of it is you've got to know what your competitors know that you don't.
Story. Your number one all-time favorite movie, correct?
Yeah.
It's great. It's a great story. To talk to me, so that was a big decision. Decision-making around uncertainty is one that we have to deal with every day, more or less. I'm assuming in healthcare and the decisions we're making, even me as a podcast host and what I'm trying to determine with my business, it's a lot of uncertainty. So how do leaders in the NFL deal with incomplete information, and how are you making decisions around uncertainty, and what can we learn in healthcare from this approach?
I think that when we're in the information business, which is what we're all in, if we don't study and research the data after we've made a decision and continue to learn from it without being labeled second guessing, without being offended that you're doing it, it's the only chance we have to make better decisions moving forward. So you have to take ego out of it. And you make a decision that doesn't go well. You made a bad decision. We all do. Right? So when I give speeches, I always show this video of the Three Stooges. So the Three Stooges are in a boat and they're fishing. And a fish actually just jumps into the boat, and there's Curly, Moe, and Larry in the boat. Well, Curly sees the fish trying to jump around, so he gets an axe to try to kill the fish. The fish jumps around, and Curly misses the fish, creates a hole in the boat. So Moe gets upset. What are we going to do? He tells Curly to go let the water out. So Curly drills another hole to let the water from the first hole out. Okay, so now he's made the problem worse. What we don't want to do is continue to make if we make a bad decision, we don't want to make another bad one. We don't want to be Curly in the boat. So what you have to do is analyze where you went wrong. And the only way you do that is take time. Once you make a decision and you're really honest about that decision, then you have to be honest about the evaluation. Sometimes was it luck that we just caught it right? Was it really a good decision? Were we ahead of our times, or what did we miss? And I think once you start breaking it down and you're honest and your ego isn't sticking your chest out saying, look how great I am, I made this great decision, then you can move forward and make another good one. Or if you made a bad one, if you don't sit there and sulk and say, oh, we were just unlucky.
That's right. I'll also say, and tell me if this is something you agree or disagree with, you can make a good decision and it still results in a bad outcome, and vice versa, right? You can make a bad decision and you just get lucky with it. So that, and have to recognize that as well, right?
That's why you have to study them, because you don't know really, you have no idea. Were you just lucky? Was it just the tide was in your favor? You know, and so I think you have to be honest with yourself and say, okay, you know, Bill Parcells, for a football coach with the Cowboys, the Giants, and the Jets and the Patriots, he would say, you know, you are what your record says you are, which is true. But you have to figure out why you win and why you lose. That's the most important thing. It's, again, going back to being self-aware. What did we do well? What did we not do well? And how were we a beneficiary of just good luck? I mean, hell, you can sell lemonade to anybody on a 100-degree weather day. It's when it's 50 degrees, can you sell lemonade?
That's right. You know, we were in the Daily Coach Network. There's a sort of a bunch of asynchronous online discussions that go on beyond these meetings that we have. And there was a discussion recently around when to push a team and when not to. You know, when is it too hard? You know, and so there's a debate going on in the community around it. And someone in the community said, you know, if we miss the opportunity, if we base our style on coaching and leading by outcomes, we miss an opportunity. And I think what he was saying is, hey, you know, even if you create good outcomes and your team's taking shortcuts, you know, it's going to have long-term detriments to the organization. So I'd love you to comment on that and think about how do you manage and coach your team and try to take yourself a little bit out of a locker room where you probably have a little bit more latitude on how you could coach hard. But how can you manage and lead hard in a business environment? Maybe put us into Bill Belichick's office outside of the locker room with his coaches and his other managers.
Well, I think a lot of the job of a leader is to understand their teams, right? Whether you're leading a football team or leading a healthcare. And, you know, one of the things that I think one of the tenets of leadership is push me when I go too slow. You know, you want to be able to, because the word compete is about stringing things together. But there's also times where you've got to be the leader and you got to bury the past. Belichick, we lost a game in Kansas City on Monday Night Football. It was depressing, you know, and everybody should I come in and beat up the team for playing so poorly? No, what we did was he said, we're on to Cincinnati. We're moving on. And so as a leader, you have to understand who you're leading and when you push and when you stop, right? Leaders, the thing is it really important that leaders explain where we're going, right? That's number one. Push people when they go too slow. Stop people when they go calm them when they go too fast. Reassure them when they lose faith, which is what we talked about earlier in the sense of looking at the scoreboard. I can reassure you right? We got to be able to have competitive stamina. We're going to get through this. Inspire people when they lose enthusiasm. I mean, look, this is one of the great things that we have to do. That's what we do. Walt Disney inspired everybody that worked for him. That's why they were all in. And then you've got to stand behind people when they do great and stand in front of them when things go wrong. And when you can do all that, you're going to build a team. But you can't do that. You've got to be able to have that ability to calm people. Churchill did this in the 40s when he said, we'll fight on the beaches, we'll fight on the shores, we'll fight anywhere.
That I want to, I know we're cutting close on time. You've got a television show you got to do. Quickly for folks listening. So if you want, I mentioned the Daily Coach Network earlier as far as what you could do to join. If you want to get more information about the Daily Coach Network, email to you and join this group of executives and coaches and managers throughout sports and non-sports, join a community with me and assistant general managers and all kinds of different walks of life around. We could send you some information. So happy to do that. On behalf of the Daily Coach Network, of people who say yes, I'll email you guys personally with some links and some necessary information. So why don't we put a poll up there? Mike, we have some questions that were submitted from guests who are attending today ahead of time. And so I want to throw a few of them this in, really good questions. And we still have time, folks, if you want to throw in your own questions in the Q&A module. So how do you manage through the years when your team's not performing to expectations?
Well, I think that, that what we're talking about is how do you maintain, there's two things you've got to do. You've got to have confidence, you've got to maintain confidence within your group without evidence. So that's a hard thing to do, but a farmer does it all the time. When he plants a field, he has no evidence that it's going to grow. He just knows he did it the right way. And so you've got to be able to give your team the confidence through your work that the process is right. The results are going to come. We just got to stay on the process. One of the things that happens to people that if the United States government spends over $750 million on trying to find men and women to join the Navy SEALs program. And within those $250 million, they end up with, each class ends up with about 175 people enrolled, and then 25 make it. It's a ridiculously low margin, right, for as much money as they spend. But what they can't determine in all the questionnaires that they do and all the psychoanalysis that they do is they can't determine who can handle volume and who can't. And so as a leader, to develop confidence without evidence, you've got to really sell them on the fact that every day we're going to get 1% better, as opposed to we're not going to lose 20 pounds in a day, we're going to lose a half a pound. And you got to really work at that. And you got to get them to believe in faith that by doing this, we will get to where we want to go. It may not show up today, but it's eventually going to show up. And that's called confidence without evidence. And then teach them about what we call competitive stamina. Competitive stamina is being able to do it every day. That's what you need. There's days I don't feel like doing it. There's days you don't feel like doing it. There's days it's hard. That's the best day.
Love that, competitive stamina. I have a couple other questions. I want to get to one, but you mentioned competitive stamina, and it's sort of I probably don't spend enough time thinking about that. Any book or TED Talk or anything that you could grab, lead us to learn more about competitive stamina so we could dive into that a bit more?
I think anytime you listen to Jocko Wilco, the former Navy SEAL, you hear it. David Goggins' book is about competitive stamina, how he went from 300 pounds down to basically couldn't make it to the Navy SEALs. I think anytime we read James Clear's 1%, Atomic Habits is really good about all this subject. It teaches you that we get measured. We're in such a generation of instant success. We've got, if you drink this mushroom coffee, you're going to lose 20 pounds in 2 weeks, right? Well, we know that's not true, but we fall for it every time, right? And so competitive stamina is I'm just going to do what I do every single day, and I'm going to do it the best I can. And when you're not worried about the result, when you're not worried about getting pins and going to Dairy Queen afterwards, you're going to make progress.
Yeah, it's funny. So I know Sherry's scrambling to get all these names. We'll put them all into the show description. But for those of you, I know what you're thinking, or many of you are probably thinking, we're in this crazy time in healthcare where these drugs called GLP-1s, Ozempic's the big one, but there's many of them. Wegovy are too expensive to cover for a lot of insurance carriers, but are very efficacious. And so there's a lot going into how do we create lifestyle changes and programs to create lifestyle changes. I'll call it competitive stamina for patients who are clinically obese and whose weight loss will support better management of their hypertension, diabetes, and any other disease. And so when you're saying that and you're talking about, that's what I was thinking. And I think those could be interesting books for those of you on the product side listening who could incorporate some of that into whatever lifestyle change programs that you want to incorporate into your sort of your prior authorization programs or anything like that. So I know we're getting close here. So free agency impacts NFL just as an employee attrition impacts all of us in healthcare. So what strategies can you suggest that helps create a culture of belonging? It's amazing to me that as many people asked Bill Belichick to take better head coaching jobs, as many people didn't leave. So what creates that culture of belonging?
Teaching. So you have to teach about belonging, right? I think one of the things we don't do a good job when we hire is basically explain to the people what you represent when you come on board. You have to honor those who came before us. That's why the Marines have such a great history. Marines fight for Marines. Walsh used to say that all the time. I think we need to spend more time on orientation. Here's who we are, and here's why we want you to be part of where we are. If you read the book Legacy by James Kerr, who we've had on the Daily Coach community, talk to us. If you read that book, it's a sense of belonging. You're representing somebody who came before you. I tell this all the time to people when I give speeches. The Michigan-Ohio State game that's played in 2075 is already sold out. And the kids who are going to play in that game aren't even born yet. That's legacy. They're coming to watch the uniforms. They're not coming to watch the kid. And so when you have a sense of belonging, when you teach that to the people who are now wearing the uniform, it's a powerful thing. It's a powerful thing.
People don't buy why you do it, right?
Yeah, and it's why we do what we do. It's the Stanley Cup. I wrote something tomorrow for the Daily Coach about what does the Stanley Cup really represent? It represents sharing. It represents a commonality of hard work that everybody gets to experience it for 100 days. Because the cup comes with rules. The cup comes with certain things that have to be addressed, and you want to share it. And through the sharing is how teams are built.
Love that. What better note to end on than the Stanley Cup? I will leave it at that. I want to thank everyone who's listening and tuning in. That we thank you, and we here never take the time you spend with us for granted. And so we hope the ideas, the bright spots, the different insights that Mike shared with you today can inspire your thinking and enhance your company's current approach to improving healthcare for all of us. Subscribe to the show. Check out the Daily Coach Network and take a look at what they're trying to do to help all industries do a better job, and everyone, managing people, managing your friends, managing your team members. We produce this show for you. Remember, this is your Bright Spots in Healthcare podcast. Take care, everyone.
Thank you, Art.
You never asked the